If you touch that piano, you're fired.
The words sliced through the champagne-soaked air like a guillotine blade. Every conversation in the Vandermeer mansion stopped mid-sentence. 200 heads turned in unison. Isaiah Bennett's hand froze 6 inches from the Steinway, the $2.5 million concert grand that sat like a sleeping giant in the center of the ballroom. His cleaning rag hung limp in his other hand, still damp with furniture polish. Madeline Vandermeer stood 10 feet away in a blood-red gown that probably cost more than his car, his rent, and his daughter's hospital bills combined. Her face was a portrait of disgust, like she'd caught him stealing the silverware instead of just standing near a piano. Actually, she continued, her voice rising, I'll do you one better. She snapped her fingers, a sound that made servants appear and grown men flinch. Play something right now, anything. Isaiah's throat went dry. Ma'am, I'm just here too. I said play. Her smile was a beautiful, terrible thing. You were staring at it like a starving man at a feast, so play. Prove you're not just another nobody who thinks he can touch things above his station. The crowd pressed closer, phone cameras lifted like a firing squad raising their rifles. A man in a tuxedo that cost more than Isaiah made in 6 months, Harrison Blackwell, the tech billionaire, swirled his scotch and smirked. $10,000 says he can't play Mary Had a Little Lamb. The room exploded with laughter, not the kind that lifts you up, the kind that buries you alive. Madeline's eyes glittered with cruel amusement. Play, janitor, or pack your things, you'll never work in this city again. The laughter didn't just have teeth anymore. It had claws. If you think this is shocking already, wait until you hear the twist. Hit subscribe now so you don't miss it. 6 hours earlier, Isaiah had woken to the sound of his daughter coughing in the next room. Their apartment building smelled like disinfectant and dreams deferred, peeling wallpaper, a radiator that only worked when it felt like it. Through the thin walls, he could hear Mrs. Chen arguing with her son in Mandarin, and somewhere above, reggaeton pulsed like a second heartbeat. In the kitchen, his mother sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold. Those hands, knuckles swollen from decades of laundry work, skin mapped with burn scars from industrial presses. She'd worked herself into arthritis so he could go to Juilliard. He never made it past the audition. You working the Vandermeer party tonight? She asked, not looking up. Yeah, mama. Good tips there. Sometimes. What he didn't say, the tips came with judgment, with being invisible until someone needed to feel superior, with smile and nod and yes sir even when they treated you like furniture with a pulse. On his way out, Isaiah passed the living room. There, covered with a bedsheet in the corner like a ghost, sat his grandmother's upright piano, the one he'd learned on, the one that taught his fingers to speak a language his mouth never could. He hadn't touched it in 3 years, couldn't afford to maintain it, couldn't afford the dream it represented. But every night, those same hands that scrubbed marble floors and emptied trash bins played symphonies in his mind. Rachmaninoff, Chopin, Debussy, the world would never hear them, he'd made peace with that. Or so he told himself. His daughter Zoe appeared in her doorway, her inhaler clutched in one small fist. 7 years old with his eyes and her mother's smile, the mother who'd left when the money ran out and the music stopped paying bills. You'll be late, Daddy. He kissed her forehead. I'll bring you something sweet, promise. She held up her pinky, he locked his with hers. That promise, that tiny finger hooked around his, carried more weight than any symphony ever could. If this part has you on edge, hit the like button right now, it lets us know you want more stories like this. Back in the ballroom, the laughter was still echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Madeline Vandermeer tilted her head, studying Isaiah like he was a specimen under glass. Her engagement ring, a rock the size of a quail's egg, caught the light as she gestured toward the piano. You know what, Harrison's right, let's have some entertainment. Isaiah felt the room's attention land on him like a spotlight with weight. Ma'am, I should really play something, Madeline interrupted, her smile sharp as a paper cut. If you can play even a simple piece correctly, let's say Fou Elise, I'll tip you $1,000. The crowd murmured, phone cameras appeared like fireflies waking up. Harrison Blackwell leaned against the piano, swirling his bourbon. and if he can't. Madeline's smile widened. Then he leaves, tonight, and I'll make sure Mr. Bennett here never works another event in this city again. The words hit like a gavel. Isaiah felt his throat tighten. He had 3 jobs, the Vandermeer estate events paid the best, lost that and Zoe's medicine, the rent, his mother's physical therapy, the house of cards would collapse. Come on, someone in the back called out, show us what you've got, Mozart. More laughter, phones raised higher. Someone started a video with the caption already typed, rich people make janitor play piano. Isaiah looked at the Steinway. The keys gleamed like teeth in a predator's mouth. His hands, still in those blue latex gloves, hung at his sides. He thought of Zoe's pinky wrapped around his. He thought of the $1,000, one night's humiliation for a month of breathing room. Okay, he heard himself say, I'll do it. The room erupted in performative cheers and cruel excitement. Madeline stepped back, gesturing to the bench like a game show host revealing a prize. Isaiah approached, pulled off his gloves one finger at a time, set them on the edge of the piano. His bare hands hovered over the keys. The room held its breath, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to fumble through Twinkle Twinkle Little Star or admit he couldn't play at all. Time didn't stop, but it slowed to syrup. Isaiah looked at his hands, really looked at them, the calluses from mop handles and bleach, the scar across his left thumb from a broken glass at some party just like this one. These weren't the hands of a concert pianist, they were the hands of a survivor. But underneath the survival, underneath the exhaustion and the 3 jobs and the giving up, something else lived. Something he'd buried so deep he'd almost forgotten it was there. His grandmother's voice, clear as a bell across 20 years, baby, they can take your money, your dignity, even your dreams, but not what God put in your hands, that's yours forever. She'd died the year he got rejected from Juilliard. He'd never played at her funeral, couldn't bear to. Isaiah closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw Zoe, her inhaler clutched tight, her pinky extended. He saw his mother's swollen hands around that cold mug of tea. He saw every person who'd ever looked through him, past him, around him, never at him. When he opened his eyes, something had shifted. His posture straightened inch by vertebral inch, his shoulders rolled back, his chin lifted. He was still wearing his janitor's uniform, still smelled faintly of pine sol and hard work. But for the first time in 3 years, Isaiah Bennett sat at that piano like a man who remembered who he was. His fingers touched the keys. The room waited for the joke to land. And then, silence. Not the comfortable kind that lives between friends, the suffocating kind that presses against your eardrums and makes you aware of your own heartbeat. Isaiah's fingers rested on the keys, white and black, ivory and ebony, the same contrast that had divided rooms like this one for centuries. Somewhere in the back, a woman whispered, "This is going to be embarrassing." Someone giggled nervously. Madeline Vandermeer stood with her arms crossed, her blood-red gown a statement of power. Harrison Blackwell swirled his bourbon, already smiling at the punchline he thought was coming. Isaiah took one breath, then another. And then his fingers moved. The first note struck the air like lightning splitting a summer sky. Not Fou Elise, not Mary Had a Little Lamb. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 in C minor, one of the most technically demanding pieces ever written. A composition that had made professional pianists weep with its complexity. A piece that required not just skill, but soul. His left hand thundered across the lower register like a storm rolling in from the ocean. His right hand answered with cascading runs that sparkled like rain on glass. The 2 hands conversed, argued, danced, made love across the keys. The ballroom didn't just go quiet. It held its breath. Isaiah's eyes closed, his body swayed, his shoulders rolled with each crescendo, the cleaning rag tucked in his back pocket fluttered as he moved, sweat beaded on his temple, catching the chandelier light. This wasn't playing. This was prayer, this was confession, this was 20 years of silence breaking open all at once. Every rejection letter, every bill he couldn't pay, every time someone looked through him instead of at him, every night his daughter coughed while he counted pennies, every moment he'd scrubbed a floor while Chopin played in his mind like a ghost. It poured out of his fingers and into that $2.5 million piano, and the instrument sang like it had been waiting its entire existence for hands like his. A woman in the front row dropped her champagne flute. It shattered on the marble, but no one looked. No one could look away from the man in the janitor's uniform who was summoning heaven and hell from 88 keys. Harrison Blackwell's hand stopped mid-swirl. The bourbon forgot to move. Madeline's arms uncrossed slowly, like someone waking from a dream they didn't understand. Phones that had been raised to capture humiliation now trembled in hands that had forgotten why they were recording. The music climbed, faster, harder. The notes crashed into each other like waves during a hurricane. Isaiah's hands blurred, his fingers flew across octaves with impossible precision. The melody soared, heartbreak and triumph woven together so tightly you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. A man in the back, an actual concert pianist who'd performed at Carnegie Hall, put his hand over his mouth. Tears formed in his eyes. "My God," he whispered, he's perfect." The tempo shifted, softer now, tender. Isaiah's touch lightened until each note felt like a secret being told in the dark. The ballroom leaned in collectively as if pulled by invisible strings. He played like a man who had nothing left to lose and everything left to say. If this moment has you holding your breath, tap the like button right now. It lets us know you want more stories like this. The final movement built like a sunrise, gentle at first, then inevitable. Isaiah's entire body moved with the music now, his spine curved and straightened, his head tilted back as if he could see through the ceiling into something beyond. The notes cascaded, climbed, exploded. And then, the final chord. C minor resolving to C major, darkness surrendering to light. Isaiah's hands lifted from the keys and hovered there, fingers still curved, still holding the ghost of the music. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, swollen with something unnamed. For 5 seconds no one moved, no one breathed. Then Harrison Blackwell's glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. And the room erupted. The applause didn't build gradually, it detonated. 200 people who had come to witness a humiliation rose to their feet as if pulled by the same puppeteer. Hands clapped until they stung, voices shouted over each other. "Incredible! How is that possible? Who is he?" Isaiah sat motionless at the piano bench, his chest heaving, his eyes still closed. When he finally opened them and turned to face the crowd, his expression wasn't triumphant. It was exhausted. Like a man who just fought a war and wasn't sure which side had won. He stood slowly, picked up his blue latex gloves from the edge of the piano, looked at them for a long moment. Then he set them down beside Madeline's champagne glass, calloused strength beside crystal fragility. The applause thundered on, but Isaiah's eyes found Madeline's. She stood frozen, her face a canvas of confusion and something else. Something that looked almost like shame, though people like her rarely named it that. "You asked me to play," Isaiah said quietly, his voice somehow cutting through the noise. "I played." He didn't wait for her response, didn't demand an apology, didn't gloat or grandstand. He simply turned and began walking toward the servants' exit at the back of the ballroom. "Wait," a voice called out. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. An elderly man pushed through, silver hair, weathered face, tuxedo that somehow looked uncomfortable on him despite its perfection. Isaiah didn't recognize him, but several people in the room gasped. "Maestro Castellano," someone whispered. Alessandro Castellano, former conductor of the New York Philharmonic, living legend, the man who discovered 3 of the greatest pianists of the last 50 years. He walked straight up to Isaiah, his eyes bright with something fierce and certain. "Who taught you to play like that?" he demanded. Isaiah's throat tightened. "My grandmother, she played for churches, weddings, funerals, whatever paid. And then she died and I couldn't afford Juilliard, and life happened." Castellano's jaw worked. He looked at Isaiah like he was staring at something precious that had almost been lost forever. "Life happens to everyone, son, but what you just did," he gestured at the piano, "that doesn't happen to everyone, that's not learned, that's not taught, that's given." He pulled a card from his inside pocket, pressed it into Isaiah's palm. Call me Monday morning, I don't care if you're scrubbing toilets or running a Fortune 500 company. You call me, do you understand? Isaiah stared at the card, Maestro Alessandro Castellano, a phone number and address. I have 3 jobs, I have a daughter who. Monday, Castellano repeated. You owe that to yourself, you owe that to your grandmother, you owe that to every person who will never get to hear you play if you don't. Behind him, Harrison Blackwell approached, his face pale. He pulled out his wallet with shaking hands. I said $10,000 if you couldn't play Mary Had a Little Lamb, his voice cracked. That was. He placed a stack of bills on the piano. That's 20,000, it's not nearly enough, it's not even close. Madeline stood apart from the crowd, her arms wrapped around herself, her expensive gown suddenly looking like a costume. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I'm sorry, she finally said, so quietly that only those nearby could hear. Isaiah looked at her, really looked at her, saw something human beneath the cruelty, something small and afraid. He nodded once, picked up the money, and walked out of the ballroom carrying $20,000 and a business card that weighed more than both. Dignity had taken the stage. And it wasn't leaving. 3 months later, Isaiah Bennett stood on the stage of Weil Recital Hall at Carnegie Hall. Not as a janitor. As a pianist. Maestro Castellano had kept his word. More than that, he'd opened doors, pulled strings, made calls. Within 6 weeks, Isaiah had an agent, a scholarship to finish his formal training, and a debut concert that sold out in 47 minutes. The video from the Vandermeer Mansion, 47 million views and counting. But the real story wasn't viral fame or redemption arcs or social media justice. The real story was simpler than that. It was about a man who'd never stopped being a musician, even when the world told him he was just a janitor. Even when exhaustion and poverty and circumstance tried to bury the music so deep he'd forget it was there. Talent doesn't wear uniforms, it doesn't arrive with credentials or permission slips or proof of belonging. It lives in the hands of the grandmother who plays at churches, in the mother who works 3 jobs but still hums while she cooks, in the father who drums on the steering wheel at red lights because rhythm is the only language that makes sense when words fail. Greatness doesn't need permission. It just needs to be seen. How many people walk past us every day carrying symphonies in their silence? How many janitors and waitresses and delivery drivers and nurses could change the world if someone just stopped long enough to listen? We live in a society that judges worth by appearance, by titles, by tax brackets, by proximity to power. But genius doesn't care about any of that. It shows up in work uniforms and calloused hands. It survives on minimum wage and prayer. It keeps breathing even when the world tries to suffocate it with bills and bias and 1,000 tiny humiliations that say, you don't belong here. Isaiah belonged at that piano the same way rivers belong to the ocean, the same way sunrise belongs to morning, the same way every human being belongs to their own story whether or not anyone's paying attention. That night at the Vandermeer Mansion, 200 people learned a lesson they should have known already. Never judge a person by what they're forced to do to survive. Judge them by what they do when given the chance to live. Isaiah's grandmother used to say that God puts music in everyone's hands. The tragedy isn't that we don't have it. The tragedy is that we spend our whole lives convinced we're supposed to be quiet. Subscribe for more stories that prove extraordinary people come in ordinary packages because everyone deserves their redemption moment. What's your hidden talent that the world hasn't seen yet? Tell us in the comments below.